Hello, and welcome to episode number 32 of the Creative Mojo podcast. My name is Joanne, and I'm the host. And I am coming to you, as always, from my home in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I'd like to welcome all my returning viewers, and I'd like to welcome new viewers. I noticed that we've accumulated a few more subscribers and viewers in the last 2 weeks or so. So if this is your first or second time watching the podcast, then welcome. And I'm glad you've taken a moment in your day to check me out. And I hope that you'll enjoy what you see, and I hope you'll consider coming back and watching again. If you do enjoy the podcast, please think about subscribing with the subscribe link down bar below on YouTube, and come over and join our Ravelry group. We have a group called Creative Mojo Podcast, or just Creative Mojo. I can't remember which. My bad. Anyway, the link, I was going to say the link would be in the show notes, but that would be silly because the show notes are in the podcast group on Ravelry. But I will put a link to the podcast to the podcast group. I'm doing so well so far. I'll explain why in a moment. I'll put a link to the group on Ravelry in the down bar below here on YouTube. I am filming actually at not quite my usual time. I usually film on the weekends, usually Saturday afternoons if I can. And this is actually Monday evening. It's about 7:30 or 7:45 in the evening, which is definitely not my usual time. Light is not ever great in my house. Most of the windows in our house face north and west, and we live on a hill that goes, like, our house is here this way, so the house next to us shades our house quite a bit. So we don't actually get a ton of natural light, unfortunately, in our house. So it's even worse in the evenings. Plus, as you can see from my opening and the fact that I was having trouble thinking about where the group was and Ravelry and all that podcast, where the podcast is and all those things are, because it's later in the day and my brain's a little more tired than usual. But this was my only opportunity. I couldn't record this weekend on Saturday because I was working, and I had today off, off from my regular day job. I work in professional theater. I'm a stage manager, and we're in the middle of rehearsing a play that we're in what we call Tech Week right now, which is technical rehearsals, adding in the lights and sound and all the technical elements. In this case, water, because the play that I'm doing is called The Drowning Girls, and the play takes place. It's sort of a ghost story based on a true story of three women who were all murdered by the same man in England in like 1912, 13, and 14. I think it was a man that married women, stole their money, got life insurance on them, and then drowned them in the bathtubs. And he murdered three women in one year after year after year for a couple of years before he was caught. And this is a sort of a ghost story of these three women, and the main set is bathtubs. And they do a lot of the play in the bathtubs, and these are bathtubs full of water. So they spend the whole play in and out of the bathtub and wet the whole time. It's actually a really, really lovely, interesting, charming play. And it's quite interesting watching something really fun and kind of obviously novel about a play where the actresses are in the water a lot of the time and do the whole play soaking wet. They're also wearing bridal dresses, sort of turn of the century bridal dresses. So we've been doing a lot of water rehearsals the last couple of days. But anyway, that's when we're rehearsing plays. We work a lot of hours, and we work weekends as well. So I was working this Saturday, and we're going into even longer hours in this coming week. So, and as I said, I was home today, but I had a lot of other things to do. Plus, my husband was home all day, and I record here in our dining room, so I find it difficult to record when he's home. So he's out this evening, and I thought this is my window of opportunity, and if I don't do this tonight, then I probably won't get a podcast up again for another 2 weeks until my play is open now. As I said, because we're going into long hours, this coming week we generally rehearse from noon till about 11 o'clock at night every day. So here I am, and excuse that the lighting, like I said, is even worse than usual. So there's even more sort of shadows, but I'm relying predominantly on natural light. It is still light outside, but it probably won't be for very much longer. And I usually drink water on the podcast to wet my whistle, but I actually have a cup of tea with me this evening. I have a lovely Earl Grey. It's a David's tea, and it's called Earl Grey Garden, and it's a strawberry infused Earl Grey, which is delicious. But I predominantly have that to get a little caffeine and wake me up. Anyway, let's get into the meat of the podcast. Obviously, I am here to talk to you about what I've been knitting in the last couple of weeks. And I've actually, considering how much I've been working, managed to have a fair amount of knitting time. Similar to the last episode, a fair amount of my knitting has been on socks, although it hasn't just been socks this week. There have been a few other things. So let me start with something other than socks, and we'll keep all the socks together towards the end of the podcast. But I did put some, I've shown this off on the podcast a couple of times before. This is the Featherweight cardigan by Hannah Fettig that I am making for a young friend of mine. She's 12 years old, and her name is Ruby June, and she's a little actress that I did a show with a couple of years ago. And if you have watched previous episodes, you'll know I had originally started a different sweater for her, and then I had some problems with it, and I put it aside for a while. And of course, if you put aside a sweater for a growing child and you leave it for long enough, what happens is basically they outgrow it before you can finish it. So I started a new sweater about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, and I'm getting close to finishing it. I've got some good work on this. I have finished now the body of this, as you can see, and I have actually finished one sleeve. Those are marking all of my decreases on the sleeves there, those progress keepers. I'm knitting this out of hedgehog fibers in the Monarch colorway, which is so pretty. It's a very pale peach color with these fantastic little pops of hot pink and yellow and black, and brighter orange as well. I knit this, I looked at, there is actually a child's pattern of the Featherweight cardigan as well as an adult pattern. And I looked at the child's pattern and the largest size in there, and then I looked at the adult smallest size and decided to go with the adult smallest size for a couple of reasons. One of which is I went down a needle size with this from what the pattern called for. I think I'm knitting this in a 3.75 millimeter. Yeah, these are the double points that I was using for the sleeve. I knit on a 3.75 millimeter as opposed to a 4 because I like the fabric a little bit better on 3.75, and I thought it would be fine because I knew it would be coming out a little bit big for her. But I definitely wanted to get a size that I thought she would have a little room to grow into. So I was fine with the idea that it was a tiny bit too big for her and that she'll be able to wear it for a little while. So the sleeve, I've done the one sleeve and I knit them at probably just past 3/4 length for her now, but again, she'll have some room. I think it'll look fine anywhere between kind of mid, I think probably right now it'll come to about here on her, but I think from there anywhere up to the elbow will still look cute. So she'll have a little bit of room to grow in this. So as I said, I knit the body. I knit the body a little longer than what the pattern called for. Oh gosh, sorry, I just noticed my light really is not great tonight. Sorry. And then I knit the body a little longer than what's called for in the pattern. It's the pattern actually has it as a fairly cropped cardigan, and I wasn't like waistline, I guess, natural waist, and I wasn't crazy about that. So I think this will probably go more to her hip. And for the bottom band, I actually used garter stitch. In the pattern, it calls for either stockinette or well, no, it calls for the rest of the sweater is stockinette. The pattern calls for a stockinette for the band that you knit on up the front and around the neckline and down the other front, and 1 by 1 rib, I think, down here. But I decided to go with a garter stitch because I just really like the way it looks. So I'm going to do, so I did garter stitch on the bottom of the sleeve as well, and I'm going to do garter stitch for that band around the front and the neckline and stuff. So some good progress on that. I suspect that I'll have this done in the next week or two and finally be able to give her a sweater, which will be great because for 2 years, every time I've run into her somewhere, her mother is also an actress and a friend of mine. So every time I run into Eleanor and Ruby June said, "How's my sweater coming?" And I feel like a terrible person because I haven't finished it. So hopefully this is going to be done soon and I'll be able to give it to her. And this is living in my beautiful Lone Larch bag made for me by my friend Jenny of the Lone Larch podcast. I really like this beautiful bag. I bought this about a month and a half, 2 months ago maybe. And it's got this gorgeous, this is linen on the bottom, nice and feels very sturdy. And then this really pretty fabric. So that's the first thing that I worked on this week. The other thing that I worked on that's not socks is the first installment of the Shawl Society Season 2. If you're not familiar with the Shawl Society, it's a 6-month pattern subscription by Helen Stewart, who's the Curious Handmaid. She's got a podcast, fantastic podcast, mostly audio. She does some video episodes, but predominantly a really excellent audio podcast. And she's also Curious Handmaid, on Ravelry, I believe, as well. But her name is Helen Stewart. And last year she did the first year of the Shawl Society, which, as I said, it's a 6-month subscription series. You pay in advance. And then she puts out 6 months worth of shawl patterns, 1 a month for 6 months after that. So the first pattern for the second year, which I did the first year, I only did 3, I think, out of the 6 patterns, but that's fine. The price is so great that even at only doing 3 out of the 6, I got my money's worth, and I still have those other 3 patterns if I want to do them at some time later. And so I purchased the Shawl Society Season 2 again, and the first pattern just came out May 4th, maybe May 3rd, just about a week ago maybe. And so I've started on that, and the first pattern is called the Fairy Hill Shawl, and it's you can do it as a 1 skein or a 2 skein. I've chosen to do the 1 skein so that I have a hope of finishing. I have a lot of 2 skein shawls sitting in a pile over there, half knit. So I was sort of lost my shawl interest for a while, but this is really kind of peeking it back in. I really enjoy Helen's patterns. They're extremely well written, and they're great even if you're a very beginner shawl knitter or lace knitter, and you don't have a ton of confidence. Her patterns are so well written. There's the instructions are line by line by line all the way through, and so you can tick off every line of the pattern as you knit it, and it tells you at the end of every row how many stitches you should have, and it gives you percentages of your yarn. Like at this point in the pattern, you should have used maybe 20% of your yarn, at this point 50%. So if you weigh your ball of yarn at the beginning before you start, then you can keep track of where you are and make sure you're not going to run out of yarn. So as I said, I'm just doing the 1 skein. It's fingering weight, this pattern, and here's what I have so far. It's really, really pretty. Hope it's going to show up okay with this crappy evening light. I'm about, I would say, third of the way through the pattern. Stockinette, and then this nice little lace. It's the same lace basically all the way through, but those lace rows get closer and closer together as you knit down. Yeah, it's a really cute, very simple. It's a simple lace. It's easy to follow. Very enjoyable to knit. I knit all of this up in about 2 or 3 evenings, I think. And the yarn that I'm using for this is Vivid Yarn Studios, who's a Canadian yarn designer from here in Alberta, so very local to me. It's her tag, and this yarn is in her Stellina base, which is a merino, superwash merino, nylon, and Stellina, and the colorway is Graffiti. And so it's really pretty. It's this sort of light, I thought when I bought it that it was cream base, but it's actually more like a light taupe almost base. And then it's got all of these little tiny sprinkles and sparkles of every color, like blue and pink and red and orange and green and yellow and black. And it's just beautiful. And then there's, as I said, the Stellina in there. I don't know if you can see the Stellina in this light, but super pretty. I've got my favorite little Progress Keeper on there, which is a cute, really cute little pig. I love this one. I have a lot of Progress Keepers, and I find some of them, while they're super cute and really enjoyable to collect, I feel like they're very heavy on my knitting, unless I was knitting a maybe heavier weight. Like when I'm knitting things out of, especially sort of drapey things, I feel like it pulls. But this is very lightweight, and I really like the little clip on this, because as opposed to a lobster clip, which a lot of them have, this is actually like a pierced earring. clips really well on, and I don't feel like it pulls on my knitting it. I don't, to be really honest, I don't remember. I think I got it on a project bag maybe, or in with some yarn or something. I can't remember where I got it, but I really love that one. I use it a lot, especially on shawls. So that's that project. Then I have, as I said, lots and lots of sock projects that I'm working on. I'll just go through them here kind of in order of how they're all laid out here on the table. This is, these are, most of these are new since the last time I recorded. These are new things, because the last time I had 4 pairs of socks I'd finished, so lots of new socks went on the needles. So mostly I'm going to be showing you new things. This is my May socks that I'm knitting for the Grocery Girls year-long, their sock bash. You knit a pair of socks every month for the Grocery Girls podcast. And these are my May socks. These are also by Helen Stewart, who also designed the shawl I just showed you. These socks are called the Apple Blossom socks. Again, really well written pattern, really fun, quite easy. It's just that little bit of lace. They look very long and narrow because essentially it's a ribbing with a tiny little bit of lace detail in the ribbing. So like ribbing does, it pulls in on itself. These are actually 64 stitches. Just going to toss it on here so you can kind of see a little bit better what it looks like. You can see that lovely little pattern there now. Isn't that cute? It'll actually be that way when it's finished, but really like them. So these are knit out of skein yarn, my favorite Australian yarn, skein artisan yarn, in the colorway, what is the colorway name? Intergalactic, this is called. But it's this beautiful, it's actually a gray base with this lovely bright green and pink. And there's a bit of white in there. And I thought they were actually very springy with that green, that bright sort of grass green, new growth green, and pink, and sort of seem to fit with the idea of apple blossoms, even though they're on this gray base. I'm really enjoying this. This is knit up quite quickly. So that's the first sock, but yeah. So there are those that I started. Then I also started a second pair of May spring socks, really. Totally on impulse the other day. I stopped by my local yarn store Stash and picked up these 2 yarns and came home and cast on this sock. So this is some more of the Yarn Ink yarn that I knit my last month's Grocery Girl socks, the Prairie socks, on. I love this as well. This color is called the White Queen, which I think is an Alice in Wonderland reference, I believe. I was knitting on these while I was watching the TV show The White Queen, which is not about Alice in Wonderland, but I thought that was very fitting. The TV show The White Queen is about the War of the Roses, like 1400s English history. Yeah, this really pretty color. There's a bit of, you can only kind of see it in the ones there, but there's black in this. It's like pale cream and very, very pale lilac with little hints of gold and black in it. And I paired it with a mini from Hedgehog Fibers. This is the most amazingly beautiful purple. It's like my favorite color of purple, this super vibrant. And it's tonal, so I don't know how much you can tell in my crappy evening light, but it's a beautiful, bright tonal purple from Hedgehog Fibers, as I said, and this color is called Spell. So here's what they look like together. The pattern I'm doing here is Wildflowers and Honeycomb. And it is also just a very simple little lace pattern. There's just little eyelet flowers in there. It's really pretty together. So I will use that purple for the cuff, and I will use it for the toe as well. Possibly the heel, although I'm not sure yet. So there are those. So both of those pairs were started, today is May 8th, so those were started May 1st or 2nd, about a week. And then what else? I finished the first sock. This is something I did show on the podcast last time. These are the Speckled Space socks. which is very fun. It's my experimenting in toe up. So these are a toe up pattern as opposed to what I normally do, which is cuff down. And I finished the first sock. I did a few little modifications to this pattern. Predominantly, the two things I did were I had to change, I knit the heel, this is toe up, but with a heel flap and gusset in the pattern. And I did actually follow that and knit the heel flap and gusset but I had to fudge the numbers a bit because I had knit the foot a little bit longer. I was worried it was going to get too long, is basically it. So in order to get the gusset into the heel turn in time to make the leg not too long, these actually fit beautifully by the way now. I did have to sort of fudge the numbers here a little bit, but that was okay. It worked out fine. Just ever so slightly probably shorter in the heel flap than, although not much. When I look at it, it doesn't really look that much shorter than when I do socks top down. So that's good. But the other thing I did was I didn't do the pattern on the back of the leg. As you can see, I just, in the written pattern, it calls for you to continue this beautiful patterning on the, when you get past the heel on the front and the back. But I read on some people's project pages that made the leg a little tighter, and I was worried that they'd be too tight in the leg. So I just left it plain stockinette in the back, left the pattern on the front. But they're so pretty, and I was very pleased with how this turned out for one of my first ever top socks. I can't remember now what I did for the bind off. Maybe I did. I think I did Jenny's surprise, Jenny's. You know, that one that nobody can ever remember which is which. One is Judy's Magic Cast On, I think, and Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off, or the other way around, one or the other. Anyway, that's what I did, I think, for the bind off, and it doesn't flare too much, which I'm pleased about, but it is nice and stretchy. That's like I said, this first sock fits really well. I haven't cast on the second sock of that yet because I got preoccupied with those two patterns I just showed you. And let's see, the last one I think I'm going to show you is I'm also working on a vanilla sock, and this is what I've been knitting on at work. So I actually have finished one sock of this. Really pretty plain vanilla sock. Very, very pretty yarn, as you can see. The yarn is, excuse me, Cloud Lover hand-dyed yarns. I picked this up a couple of years ago at the Zombie Knitpocalypse yarn event, and the colorway is Iris. And it's a 80-20, it's a brushed merino nylon. And yeah, it's just beautiful. Lots of, so very heavily variegated, so I thought it would be best for a vanilla sock. So I knit that in the last couple of weeks at work, and I'm about that far into sock 2. So these generally live with me, just stay at work, stay on my desk, so to speak, at work, my workstation, and I work on them when I get moments here and there in rehearsals. So that is those. I do have the Cookie sock that I showed you last week. I did a little tiny bit more in that, but I don't think I'll show it again today because it's not really enough progress to be too terribly excited about. So that's all of the knitting I have to show you this week. I don't have any finished objects because everything is all new, and as you can see, I've shown you quite a raft of new things. But it works out quite well because I bet next time I record, I will then have a bunch of finished objects again. So, speaking of Cookie A and the socks I'm not going to show you this week, I wanted to talk a bit more about Cookie A. I mentioned in the podcast last week, or 2 weeks ago, I think was when I recorded last, that I was thinking about a Cookie A sock knit along coming, that we would do that for our next knit along together in over the summer. And I thought about it some more, and I thought, I think that would be fun to do. I was thinking that of running it for June and July, 2 months. And the reason I was thinking Cookie A is because she's definitely my favorite sock designer. She's really prolific. I counted up today, and I think there are something like 120, maybe even more, slightly more than 120 sock patterns that she has designed, which is phenomenal to me. And there are so many patterns that are of so many different experience. There's something for everyone. There's something for whatever kind of sock. The only thing I guess I would say about in that realm is that pretty much all her patterns are top down. That's the way she likes to knit socks, and that's the way she designs socks. There may be one or two toe-up patterns, but predominantly they're all top down. But a lot of them would be not that difficult to, some of them anyway, would be not that difficult to reverse and do toe-up if that's your preferred method. You can, with some of them, are the kind of pattern where you could actually just knit from the toe up and just knit the chart, and it would be upside down from what it was if it was top down, but that wouldn't matter. Or I know you can also convert patterns by sock charts are written to be read from the bottom up, but you do them from the top down, and then they would be the same orientation as what knitting them toe up as they would be knitting them top down. Hope that made sense. But other than that, I mean, she has so many variations of patterns. There are cabled socks and lace socks and socks that combines cables and lace. And they're fairly simple patterns. If you're not super experienced at patterned sock knitting, there's a couple of great patterns to start out with. The one that I recommend the most is the monkey socks. Which actually her pattern for monkey socks is top down, but there are toe-up varieties, and I would allow that in the knit along as well. If you found somebody just took her pattern and converted it to a toe-up pattern. I think there's also a no purls version of the monkey socks. Her pattern has some knits and some purls in it, but there's a version you can do without having to purl, and I would allow those too. So monkey socks are a fantastic first pattern sock if you're just venturing into that realm of sock knitting. It's a very easy pattern to memorize. It may look like it's a little intimidating, but if you just relax and get into it pretty quickly, you kind of figure out the rhythm of that. And it was the first pattern sock I think that I knit, and I have knit monkey socks, I would say maybe 8 or 10 times over the years since I first discovered that pattern. But I've recommended it to lots of people, and they've said, oh, you're right. Once I got a little way into it, it's a really easy pattern. It's very memorizable. It's very enjoyable. It works really well with any yarn, from plain, like a solid color to wildly variegated. A lot of the monkeys I've knit are wildly variegated yarns, and it always looks good with whatever yarn you put it with. So, and the monkey socks are available free. Through knitty.com, you can download that pattern for free. So, and she's got 4 or 5, including the monkey sock, she's got 4 or 5 patterns that were published on Knitty that are still available for free. So there's, if you don't want to spend money on buying one of her patterns, there are a few patterns you can do for free. There's definitely some patterns that are simpler sorts of repeats and easy and good. They are all charted, so you would have to, if you've never done a charted pattern before, you would have to be brave and venture into chart knitting. But if you're an experienced sock knitter, there's all kinds of different levels of challenge to her sock patterns. There are easier ones. There are kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Intermediary, maybe. I don't know. See, it's late. My brain is like, it's time for bed soon. But there are, and then there are very difficult, complicated patterns. I've knit quite a few of her more complicated ones, and I really enjoy them. I find that her patterns are so well written. She is, I think, the best sock pattern writer that I've come across in all the pairs of socks that I've knit over the years. Even the most complicated ones I have been able to follow without any difficulty, and she's got wonderful sock books that give some extra technique help as well. But even all the patterns that are in her sock books are also available individually for purchase. She's had pattern clubs. I don't know if there's, I think they are still going. I don't know, maybe there aren't, maybe it's not going this year, but for a number of years she had sock clubs. I was in it one year where you, again, pay in advance and you get a pattern every month all year. Or no, you get 6 emails a year, and each one has, you get 12 patterns, but it was every 2 months you got an email with 2 patterns in it. And yarn as well. So you get 1 skein of yarn with 2 possible different patterns that you could knit, and you ended up at the end of the year with 12 patterns, and you'd gotten 6 skeins of yarn. So I was in that one year, and I knit almost everything that came in that. So I was going to show you a few of the pairs of Cookie A socks that I've knit over the years, and then, as I said, what I was thinking was that I would do that we would do a Cookie sock knit along, starting at the beginning of June and running until the end of July. So you would have 2 months, so that if you wanted to attempt one of the more complicated patterns, I know a few of her more complicated patterns took me a while. I think there were some that took me like 6 months, but that's because I wasn't working on them all the time. But even if I was working on them all the time, some of the more complicated ones, you can only kind of, I can only kind of knit a little bit on it at a time, and then I have to stop and knit on something easy or take a break or whatever. So they take me longer to do. So, or you could do more than one pair. I would allow you as many entries as you finish, as long as you start after June 1st and finish after July 31st. So yeah, so I thought that might be fun to do for the summer. I'll come up with a couple of prizes, depending on how many entries we end up with in the at the end of the day. I would do probably at least 2 prizes, and I'll open a chatter thread when I post this episode and the show notes for this episode, so that if you want to ask questions, if you want to talk a little bit about what patterns you thought you might do, or what yarn you might use and all that kind of thing, we could start a little chat in there. I have an idea for what I think I'll do. But anyway, I thought I'd show you a few of the pairs of Cookie socks that I've knit over the years. The first ones I'm going to show you, these are also a free pattern on Knitty. These socks are called the Hedera, I believe, Hedera. I think it's pronounced Hedera. The Hedera pattern. It's actually, it's a beautiful pattern, and it looks very fancy, but it's actually quite simple. It's essentially, that's one repeat, so it's just that set of stitches repeated around and around and around. It's a little twisted stitch, simple cable. I think the only cable crossing in there is a 1x1 cable. So again, if you're not super confident and familiar with cables, that would be a pretty easy and good place to start. So there's some twisted stitch ribbing. And yeah, I knit these in 2009. I was noticing when I pulled them out of the sock drawer that I obviously wore them a lot a few years back, because there were some holes in the bottom of the foot that I obviously at some time, I think looking at how evenly these holes are across the bottom of the foot, they're all darned now. I obviously caught them on something on the floor and ripped it, our floor somewhere here, and ripped a little hole across it. But anyway, this was knit out of, I think this was called Art Yarn was the name of this yarn brand, I believe. So long ago. Anyway, those are really, that's a really, really nice pair. Actually, deceptively pretty simple, but they look fancy and nice. That's, like I said, the Hedera socks that I knit in 2009. These are also knit in 2009. It's a pattern called Maelstrom. Slightly more complicated, although honestly not. Again, that's the delight of Cookie socks. Most of them are not as complicated as they look. So this is a lovely sort of twisted, it's actually sort of ruching here. Oh, and there's a little bit of lace, yarn overs essentially, that spirals around the leg, that pattern, and then it goes into ribbing down the foot. That was knit out of, this is, oh my gosh, I can't think of it, the name of the yarn, and I didn't write it down. It'll come back to me in a minute. This is a pair of more complicated of hers. I showed these off in a very early episode of the podcast, but this is the Christie pattern. I knit these in 2003. This is a beautiful, you can see a beautiful twisted stitch, very complex cable pattern. Same on both sides. I think they're mirrored, so the one sock is the opposite of the other one. I knit this out of some Cupcake yarns. Beautiful yarn. Unfortunately, she doesn't dye anymore. She was kind of an early pioneer in the speckle dyeing. And I won a red ribbon for these at the Calgary Stampede in 2013 when I knit them, and I entered them in they have a knitting competition. They have a whole bunch of craft competition as part of the Calgary Stampede, and I won a red ribbon for these, so I was very proud of them. That's the Christie socks. Then these are called Cusp. These are also a twisted stitch with, she often does these patterns that sort of twist around the leg, which I really, really like. But Hazel Knits, I knew it would come to me when I wasn't thinking anymore. This is knit out of Hazel Knits Artisan Sock. These socks are out of Wollmeise. And yeah, it's all just a twisted stitch rib. And then this lovely lace pattern that spirals all around the leg, as you can see. Again, not anywhere near as complicated as they look. This is a pair of monkeys. This is probably my most recently knit pair of monkeys. And see, they look, they're great for variegated yarn because they really break up. You won't see any pooling in a variegated yarn because of the wonderful way it breaks up the knitting on the, but in this patterning, I'll show you this. It's really fun. It's just these sort of V's. And this is what I was saying. It's actually very easy to memorize. Very, very fun to knit. These were out of a Becoming Art yarn. And the last pair I was going to show you these are called Ernie. Sorry, I was looking down at my show notes. These are called Ernie. And these are from the yarn club the year I was in it, I think. I didn't knit these out of the yarn that came with this pattern. I knit them out of some skein yarn. But it's these really, it's a rib essentially down the leg, but there's a little cable in that rib. And again, these are actually quite simple, easy to knit, but they look so impressive and fancy and beautiful. So those are just some of, I have probably another 6 or 7, maybe even more, 6 or 7 at least pairs of Cookie A socks in my sock drawer. Actually, I probably have about 10 more different pattern pairs. I've knit so many of them over the years. But she's got so many that there's always more. This is the one that I'm thinking that I will knit in June. Come here. It's gonna, this is called Istanbul, this pattern. Not beautiful, very, very beautiful, delicate lace pattern. I just love that. These are one of the pairs that came, one of the designs that actually came with the sock club when I was in it that I didn't ever knit. So I have this pattern. And I just think they're so beautiful. So that's the ones I'm going to do. And I might even do a pair each month, June and July. So that's the plan. I hope that some of you will be interested in coming and knitting along some Cookie A socks with us. And with that, I'm going to sign off today, I think. My light just keeps keeps getting darker and darker and darker in here. And so that, I think, will be that for today. Again, thank you all so much for choosing to spend a little bit of time with me. I really, really do appreciate it. I don't say very often, but it means the world to me, the fantastic comments I get, and seeing, the people participating in the knit-alongs that we do. And it's been really exciting seeing some new subscribers coming along the last couple of weeks. And yeah, I hope that you've been enjoying the podcast, and I hope that you'll come back and watch again and continue to enjoy it. And it will probably be, as I said at the beginning, about 2 weeks before I can record again, because I will wait now until my show is up and running, and I'll have a bit more time in the daytimes and better lighting. So until then, thanks so much and happy knitting.